Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole
and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and we're here to interview world-leading researchers, clinicians and people with lived experience
to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
Hello and welcome to Research Works.
Hello and welcome. I don't know, how great is that? And Marissa, you're back on hosting duties. How nice is this?
I'm always happy to be back.
I know. You're particularly really happy with this one as well. I mean, the last time we spoke, we were interviewing you about the paper for AusACPDM. Mm-hmm. And then now we've managed to get you back on. When I asked you about this yesterday, I'll have to say you said yes before I'd even finished my sentence.
Yeah, I didn't actually check what I had on, but I really wanted to be part of this. And that is because who we're talking to today had a real impact on me at the conference. Yeah. So I would like to welcome today who was a panel member for the final presidential lecture at AusACPDM, Carol Shrader. Welcome, Carol.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I love that we got to connect again, particularly, I mean, we only saw you a few days ago at the conference, but it was true. We were all just reflecting as a team about how great the conference was. And when we were talking about our highlights and what people loved the most, it's just the presidential guest lecture, the panel discussion, the richness of conversation. I know you're one of 5 people, was it 5? People that were there, having that discussion, but every time you had something to say, Carol, I was like, I want more. I want more. And so thank you. So we reached out to you immediately and we're just so grateful to have you on. And let's chat about some really good stuff today. I'm looking forward to it.
But before we jump into all of our questions and a very exciting conversation, I want to tell our listeners a bit more about you, Carol.
Yeah.
So Carol is a mother to young adult triplets, 2 of whom have cerebral palsy and a teenage daughter. Carol is passionate about helping others find the joy in raising their own children with CP, helping our children reach their full potential. This came through so strongly in the panel discussion and we can't wait to get into it today. But before we go into it, we always have an icebreaker question. So Carol, today, now that you've spent some time in Australia, the question is, what are the biggest differences or similarities between the US and Australia?
Big question. Big questions, vehicle. Yeah.
I mean, we could just start with the fact that I got to pet a koala bear. I mean, I don't think I can do that in the United States.
That's awesome.
And Wade took pictures and I look like a child on Christmas morning. Like, I'm like, oh,
they're real and they're here.
Right. And they just look like stuffed animals. Like, even looking back at the photos, I'm like, nobody is going to believe this was real. It doesn't look real, but it was. I think that I really believe that Australia and the United States have so much in common. They feel we're in Melbourne today, and it feels very. I feel like I know where I am. I'm walking around. Wade and I took in a show last night because it happened to be. Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely country. But y'all drive on a different side of the road.
Oh, that's a good one.
So
yeah.
I have almost gotten run over by a couple of buses because I'm looking this way and they're coming this way and I am just stepping out. Wade has grabbed me a couple of times like, you're looking the wrong way.
That is
so I like the koalas better than the traffic.
Fair enough. Actually, it is quite off-putting, isn't it? And the whole road safety. You're right. You have to. It takes me forever to decide to cross the road because I'm just like, am I looking in the right way?
Which way?
That's a really good one. That's huge implications. Driving as well on the other side.
Yes,
huge.
Yeah, that's definitely a difference. Look, I'll start with the difference because it is quite funny and just so random and doesn't impact anyone's life in any way. You often hear that the toilet, when you flush the toilet, the water goes in the other direction, whether you're in the US versus Australia. And I was like, no way.
No.
And so I did, when I was last in the US, flush the toilet and had a look to see which direction it goes. And I didn't have no idea what it is in Australia, but I did come back home and flush the toilet and went, it does go in a different way. Doesn't impact anyone's life. It's
okay, I'm going to have to check that though. But I haven't even noticed.
Right? Why? And who first noticed it? That now we all have to check it. So look, I'll definitely say that. And maybe another difference, there's a lot of beautiful similarities, but the different things are always really funny is that, at least in Australia, I don't have to calculate tips. Not that it's difficult, but it's still maths on a daily basis. When I was in the US and had to calculate tips, I was paranoid. I've probably tipped like either too much or too little. I probably offended everyone. I had no idea. But that was hard. And doing the maths was hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Sometimes they put it on the receipt for you already, but other times you have to work it out.
Yep. I have a daughter who hates math. She hates it. And she was out to a restaurant. And we're big, like I believe in tipping. I waited tables to pay for college. So I've really drilled it into my kids. And so she texts me and she's like, here was the check amount. And this is what I tipped. Is that okay? I'm like, well, yeah. A 400% tip, I'm sure he liked it. She's like, Mom, I can't do math. Luckily, it was just, it was like breakfast. She was like only having coffee. So it wasn't like it was a huge amount, but she tipped like.
That's very generous of her.
We're working on it. Right. We're working on it.
And she probably made that person's day and they had a really great day. And hopefully that, that blessing just kept going to the next person. It just kept going, multiplied. Hopefully. Yeah, let's say that.
Multiplied.
Yeah. What about you, Marissa?
Look, my difference is I'm going to go the snow. So in America, I feel like you get such good snowfall in certain places, and obviously that times with Christmas, and so that's just such a different experience for us compared to a really hot, dry Christmas. So that's like obviously a huge difference, which is more about where we are on the earth, but that is a real big difference that I note.
We don't get white Christmases here.
No.
Yeah.
And a similar.
We were discussing that yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were discussing that yesterday, that has to be hard, that it's warm.
It is. It takes a bit to get used to, actually, because, all the movies we watch.
Yeah, we grow
shows.
up watching winter sweaters and jumpers. We definitely don't need them.
No. Yeah, it's really disappointing not being able to wear your jumper.
Yeah.
Sweater.
See, I use that. I've learned.
Yeah.
And look, a similarity.
Another difference.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Just because it's the Olympics, I've been watching a lot of it. And I would say that both countries are very passionate with their sport.
Oh, true.
And we can often be neck and neck with things. Swimming recently.
Yes, the rivalry
very
was
close
strong.
with lots of things. So I would say that passion behind that sport is big.
And how that brings people together. I actually really love that.
It does. Well, Wade and I were sitting in a restaurant in Cairns after the conference and rugby was on. And so we were totally both watching it like, wow. And so we get back to the hotel and he's quiet and I'm quiet. And he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm looking up, and he goes, the rules for rugby? So am I. I was totally like, we were both on our phones, like trying to figure out what we had just been watching and how we can make more sense of it.
Yeah. Carol, we did speak with your husband, Wade, on the conference series. So it was only a short conversation. Again, could talk to him so much more. And he did give us a little bit of a snippet about your family, what we thought, how beautiful would it be for you just to tell us a little bit more about your family and I guess set the context for what we're about to talk about.
I would love to.
Yeah,
I would love to.
You.
So Wade and I, what you maybe didn't go into, because he's a guy and gives it a little more dry than me. We were college sweethearts. So we dated all through our university time, and Wade was an aerospace engineer major. So he took a job working for NASA as an aerospace engineer. And we got married immediately after graduation. Like we graduated one Saturday, married the next Saturday, and moved for his job the next Saturday. So it's a little bit crazy.
It's like in the movies. It's amazing. I love it.
Right?
Yeah, I love it. Anyway,
so we were pretty young. we were young, and he was working at NASA, and I was working in journalism communication stuff. And my father got sick, so my dad got sick, and we were in the medical field a lot. And Wade, in the meantime, was really going to work, and there'd be a sticky note on his computer that said, quit working on this. Congress killed it last night, right? Or whatever. So it was very frustrating. He began to feel that he was really just spinning his wheels. And in the meantime, we're seeing the medical world very up close and personal with my family. So he came in one day and he was like, what do you think about me going to medical school? And I was a new bride. So I was like, honey, I will support you in whatever you do. But in my head, I was like, no way am I going to be a doctor's wife. Like, I just need more attention than that, right? Like, that is not going to happen.
I love that.
But 4 years into our marriage, we moved to Chicago for Wade to go to medical school at the University of Chicago. So we got a job as dorm parents. So we had 80 undergrads at the university who called us, called on us for all things.
80.
80.
Wow.
80. And we found out we were pregnant with triplets. So it was just a good time.
Wow, Carol.
A lot of fun.
Wow.
So we have, we joke that in the middle of the night, I have newborn triplets that have just gone to sleep. And this young girl knocks on our door, and I go to the door, and she's like, the girls in my room are burning candle. They've got a candle burning, and I hate the smell of the candle. And I'm like, okay. She's like, you have to come deal with it. And I'm like, I want you to pay close attention. Just look at me. And I held up my finger and went, you go back to your room. She was like, okay. We were learning a lot, right, about parenting. Pretty early, because we had triplets, and that's a developmental preschool. We knew that the boys were not reaching the same milestones as their sister. And so we began to be very hyper vigilant about everything going on in our home.
Wow.
Wade was finishing medical school when we realized the boys had cerebral palsy. In 1997, 8, 9, they were born in 1997. So in 1999, you were really waiting to that 2-year mark before you received a diagnosis.
Wow.
I'm thrilled with the research today that allows us to help parents earlier. We had started some early intervention, but really that firm diagnosis came just as Wade was finishing medical school and heading to residency. And so we began a path of excruciating hours for him. He was really devoid of time for emotional issues or physical issues or anything, right? It was all about residency. And in the meantime, I'm at home with these beautiful babies, but everything I do is trying to help them reach a milestone and get there. And then to convince him, because he's not seeing them until they're either sound asleep or very tired.
Of course.
I'm trying to convince him that they're going to be okay, right? They're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So it was a really hard time, those early years. So a lot of that is why I'm so passionate about helping other moms. I think that we have to move, I have to help moms move forward, because that season is so emotionally fraught. So that's why I'm delighted to speak with y'all today and talk. Now, I will tell you that I'm going to fast forward a couple of years and say that when the triplets were 7 and 8, I really wanted another baby. And we had a little girl. So she was born with 8-year-olds and a mom and dad who are standing over her telling her she's wonderful. So she's 18 now. She still thinks she's the center of all that, and we all treat her like she is. But yeah, so that's our little family.
Gosh.
Yeah.
What a beautiful story. And thank you for being so generous and sharing all of that. That is just, what a journey. And you can almost feel already just the similarities of so many discussions we have with mums in the early years. And it feels so alone, and there's just so much happening, and it's hard to have friends that are experiencing the same thing. So people like you to be able to share your story, it just helps so much. It's really incredible.
And also balancing things with other things going on in life. Like you said, obviously the boys getting their diagnosis and then having, work commitments, and obviously residency is a huge thing, and siblings and other things going on as well.
That's right.
So can you tell me a bit more? You mentioned obviously the boys were diagnosed. Did you say around 2? Around 2. And once they had the diagnosis of CP, what was the early intervention kind of years like for you and your family?
Yeah.
So we had a beautiful experience in Chicago. We were, the boys were about 9 months old when my pediatrician was like, okay, Carol, I hear that you're concerned. Let's start, early intervention. Let's start some therapies. And so we began working with a physical therapist in the hospital and an occupational therapist through early intervention. I will tell you that those first few months, so the occupational therapist's name was Susan. Susan was one of my favorite people on the planet. And she had actually been in the hospital delivering her first child the day the triplets were born. And we, unbeknownst to us, had the same doctor.
Wow.
And she said so when she met me, she's like, oh my gosh, I remember, right? They were running up and down the hall saying the triplets were coming and that was you, right? So we had a connection already.
Yeah.
But I remember she was working so hard to get the boys to reach, and she wanted them to reach. She's holding these beads and she wants them to grab them. And Claire loved these beads. Like, we would get home and she would have them in her diaper, like, I'm taking these home with me. But my boys were not so excited about these beads. Like, I kept thinking, find something they want to grab. And so one day I just looked at Susan, and I had been trying to ask this question for weeks, but I didn't really want to know the answer. But I looked at her and I was like, I need to know when we're working on the big stuff. When are you going to get them crawling? Yeah. Right? When are you going to teach Benjamin to roll over? Yeah. And when are we? And I had tears running down my face. Susan had tears running down hers. And she was like, right, we've got to do some background work first. Like, we've got to get them reaching. We've got to get them trying to engage. And she was like, but I believe in these boys, right? We're going to make them work. And we both just wiped our face and we got to work. And I never felt like I had to ask the question again. So the early intervention was, I say that more for me than for the boys. I needed someone holding my hand through those early years. Yeah. It's very hard to be the mother and trust your instincts when you've had premature babies who were in the NICU for a while. And now they're facing things that are not in the what to expect books, right? Yeah. There's not a chapter on what happens when they're missing their milestones. And so I remember being with our physical therapist one day, and she was young and precious, but she didn't have children yet. And she wanted to take Mason out of the room where I was, and he was little and he wanted to be where we were. And so he screamed, and I'm out in the hall and I can hear him screaming. And I finally just went in the room and I'm like, I don't think you're going to get any therapy done if he's screaming. Like, he needs to be in the room with us. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But it was one of those moments that I hope she doesn't remember. Like, I hope that I didn't, insult her in any way, but it was pivotal for me because I realized I did know my children. Yes. Right. Yes. And I should speak up for them. Yes. That's super hard. I think that's one of the hardest things for moms in that early intervention time is to trust our instincts, because we're not trained in this area. Gosh. And the parenting books don't cover it.
They don't. And look, just on that, Carol, that's such an important point to pick up on. We've spoken about this a few times on the podcast where we're talking about crying during therapy, and our stance on it is no crying. It is the child, it should not be distressing. One, because of communication, like crying is a form of communication, and there's a mother's instinct, like it's heartbreaking. And I see this on social media a lot, which is why we've wanted to address it, is you do see sort of parents sort of watching their child with a therapist, and the child's clearly distressed, and the parents kind of like, oh, and or they're cheering them on or something like that. And it's really quite difficult to watch. Talk us through that a little bit more in terms of, I guess, your stance on it and your view. Yeah.
Well, I am very opinionated about it. So as you saw at the conference, I think that, and probably because I have the gift of being a mom with 27-year-olds today. So I can look back on it and say, don't take their childhood, right? Don't steal their childhood unless you can tell me for certain that this is going to help. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So early intervention is so important. And I do think it is important, but I also think that our children should never be in distress, that if they're crying, they're not, and there's nothing to be gained from that situation. I tell my kids today, when they call me from grad school or whatever, and they're stressed out and they're very upset, and I'm like, you need to leave your apartment and go do something fun. I don't have time to do that. And I'm like, you can accomplish nothing. That's right. In this state. Yes. Our brains do not work when we're distressed, right? And that's the same for infants. They can't learn a new skill,
No.
if they're so distressed, there's nothing to be gained from that. And so I do think at that point, we need to be engaging with mom and allowing her to comfort.
Yes.
And if that means we send her home and say, y'all, this nothing else needs to happen today. Right?
Yeah.
Then that's what needs to happen. I feel pretty strong. Now I need to say that that same therapist that, when he was 9 months old, she wanted Mason to cry. She very quickly learned his personality. And by the time he was 18 months old, she knew that he would do therapy much better if he had an audience.
Yeah.
And so she gets his little K walker and she puts him in the hall of the hospital, and people are clapping. They're just kind of lining the corridors clapping. And he just, he took off, right? He was so happy. And so he took his first steps because there was an audience to clap for him.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's important. So the triplet that doesn't have cerebral palsy is an occupational therapist. And she knew she wanted to do that since she was 14 years old. And so when she's going to undergrad and trying to decide what to major in pre-occupational therapy, I'm like, psychology. You need to major in psychology. You need to know how to motivate, right? You need to know what that little Mason wants to walk down the corridor with people clapping for him, right? You need to be able to pick up on that. So she did. She listened.
Isn't that so good? That's so good. But we talk about that a lot too. And it's so lovely to hear you say it from your perspective because, we can work on the motor skills. We can tick them off. But actually what we're more interested in is developing a human being that's going to live a lovely, beautiful, wholesome life. And cognition, we spoke about that at the conference a fair bit, but actually what motivates them.
It's huge.
Yeah.
That's everything.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And even I love how you said about the importance of childhood. So whatever we are doing, if we are intervening with therapy, you want to make sure it's the right stuff that you're doing, that we're doing. Yeah, because you don't want to take away from what childhood is, even if that's just having time with your parents and having that attachment. That has a huge importance.
Yeah. Probably a good time to talk about it now then, Carol, is how did you make your choices about what therapies to do? Because fortunately, I suppose, the time that you were bringing them up during this early intervention phases, there was no social media. So that's actually a really good thing.
Right.
But, in terms of making your choice and what were you willing to trade time for? Because it sounds like you were really thoughtful about what you were doing and how much. And
well, I sound like I'm thoughtful today. I think there were days, and while we didn't have Facebook, they were they were 10 when Facebook kind of came out, but we did have like parent email chains. Do you know what I'm talking about? Are you familiar with those? So you'd be on this group of cerebral palsy families that you don't know. They're all over the world, and they're talking about, rhizotomies and conductive ed, and there's just all this noise.
Yeah.
I knew in my gut that I didn't want the boys to spend 8 hours a day doing therapy. So Benjamin is my son that's in a power wheelchair. And even in early intervention, his occupational therapist would often, I would, be there and she would say, we got nothing done today. He asked me what movie I liked or I saw this weekend. We started down a path of talking about the movie. The hour was up and I realized he had totally manipulated me, right? Like he was he knew at a very young age what he was interested in, and it really was not moving or manipulating anything with his hands. So, so I knew, right, that was not his thing. Mason wanted to move, and Mason, so spending more time on physical activity was important for him. But for us at 4, when we're getting therapy in the schools, so the kids are in preschool, they're getting therapy there. We're still doing 1 hour a week in the hospital with the rehab team. I let them pick what else they wanted to do. And I had triplets, so they couldn't pick 15 things, but they could all pick one. And so, we were doing like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and then they could pick an activity. But Mason wanted to do gymnastics. And I found this wonderful gymnastics studio where the woman who owned it taught special ed physical education in the school system. And so she had just enough knowledge, and she was a great gymnastics coach, and she was willing to put those two together. And he had the best time, learned more about his body and how to control it.
Yeah.
So at a young age, I figured out that we had to find a way for them to do the therapies that were fun, right? They were only going to move and try to understand their bodies more if they were driven in that area. Then we signed Benjamin up for a theater class, right? Right. So it was important to let their interest be our North Star.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I need parents to understand, is that we have to get out of their way. So can I just tell you when I knew I had to get out of my way? Because I think this is a crucial part of our story, is that when they were 3 and 4 and the therapist would say the word wheelchair, I would shut the door and tell them they had to leave. Like, we're not talking about wheelchairs in front of my boys. For me, I recognized Benjamin's personality. He was using a little walker to walk, and I knew his North Star, right, was talking. Yeah. So I knew once he got in a wheelchair, we're never going to move again. And I thought that would be the end. Like, life as I knew it would be over, right? Because my paradigm was he had to walk, and that's the end all be all.
Yeah.
Mason was using at that point little cuff crutches, and nobody was really talking about a wheelchair for him. So I began to call it the W word. Like, if you're gonna talk about wheelchair, you have to say it with just a W. You and I can talk about it, but you're not talking about it in front of Benjamin. And I mean, I was just very adamant. And I know that shut them down. I know our therapists were afraid then to bring it up, which is a mistake, because I didn't know what I didn't know, right? Yeah. So Benjamin is 5. He's almost 5, and we're getting ready to think about formal education. Kindergarten is starting soon, and we're at physical therapy, and I would push the boys in a double stroller. And then when we would get to therapy, Mason would get out and do his. And so Benjamin's physical therapist is trying to teach him to get from the stroller to his little walker. And they scoot and they, cajole, and she gets him out of the stroller, and now he's in the walker, but he's in it backwards. And she says, "Oh, and I hope this translates in Australia. What I'm gonna say to you," because she says, "Well, how are you going to turn yourself around?" And Benjamin goes, "I guess I'll do the hokey pokey."
I love that.
No. We do know the hokey pokey. We do know. Yeah, we do it. Okay, good. So, I mean, he's 4 years old, and he didn't miss a beat. He didn't think about it twice. He was like, "I guess I'll do the hokey pokey." He was so funny. We're all laughing, and I'm like, I'm making him enter every space ready for a nap. Right. I would put him down in his walker outside his little preschool, and I would say, "Go." In 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it would take him to get up the ramp, and he's in his class ready to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm raising a brilliant, funny, creative kid that I'm exhausting every single minute of the day.
Wow.
And I knew we had to talk about wheelchairs. We had to talk about it. So I tell the therapist, who you might understand is a little like, "Whoa, you have not said this word out loud." And so we go, she sets up an appointment for us to go meet with a wheelchair clinic. And when we walk in, Benjamin looks at me and he goes, "But I walk, Mommy." And so I was this close to scooping him up and just leaving. And he saw the joystick on the wheelchair. And I don't know what it is with boys and joysticks, right? But like, that looked really cool.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So we put him in that wheelchair, and he immediately drove.
Wow.
And rammed into a wall. Oh. And I thought he was injured. The sound is so loud. He is cackling, laughing. He is so happy. And then he begins immediately to turn that chair on a dime and to navigate his own space.
Amazing.
We borrowed the wheelchair, and we go to therapy the next day. So we're in the hospital, and he is driving. and I turn around and he's gone. Like, I'm herding cats, right? I've got like Claire pushing a baby doll stroller and Mason with his little crutches. And I turn around and Benjamin's not behind me. He's nowhere. We're all searching. The therapists are looking. The administrative assistants are looking. He was visiting patients. He decided he could cheer them up if they could see his face. And he is just driving into rooms. His entire world changed because he could navigate his space and not be exhausted. And I, in my paradigms, because the What to Expect When You're Expecting book says we should be walking, was holding him back the whole time, right? Because I wanted him walking independently. And so what I need for mothers to understand today and we have to let them be, find a way to help them ambulate, find a way to help them move. I see the Go Baby Go stuff now where they're putting, and I applaud, because if Benjamin had a way to navigate his space as a 3-year-old, then I would have understood how important that was for him and who he is and what his goals in life were. So it was life-changing for him. Absolutely life-changing.
Gosh, that is most compelling, the most strongest description of that whole process that we know that families agonize over, because it's true. We're so walking is that's that milestone that just continuously sits there, and the talk about being in the wheelchair feels, I think from the way I've heard it, it almost feels like you failed. Like you didn't quite do enough therapy to get to that place. So from your perspective, Carol, that was a journey that you went on, and a true moment of realization. What sort of advice would you give to, us as therapists or for families, if we're seeing this? Do we give it space? Do we introduce the concept early? Like, what do you think would be really helpful?
I think, and I've obviously thought about this so much, like what would have made the difference? And there are a few things. First, you need to know that moms can only hear what they can hear. Yeah. So you may be saying the same things every week. It feels like every single time you see this patient, you're saying the same things. But the emotion of the acceptance process is so hard that mom may not hear it the first 5 times you say it. Yeah. Right. We're just convoluted. We're processing so much. What I wish I had known. And so this is what I would say to you is talk about the benefits of navigating your own space. Benjamin today at 27 still has some spatial issues, right? Like he can't, if you tell him to go left or go right, he can drive through Times Square without a problem because he thinks New York is all that. I would love to get him in Melbourne. I think he would love it. But, if I tell him, you want to go to a store that you're going to go out of this building and go left, he gets confused and he has this spatial awareness issue. How much space do I have to turn? Those are things that we develop by navigating our space earlier in life, right? Right. But I didn't know that until it was too late. So if we're telling moms, look, we know we want to be walking, we're going to continue working with the walking, but let's get Benjamin in one of these baby, small, tiny wheelchairs and let him at least experience navigating his space. Yeah. I think that it changes things, right? When we're talking about, we want you to develop to be your absolute best self. This is one of the keys to doing that is spatial awareness. Yeah. So we've got to have powered mobility at an earlier age if we're going to do that. That's how I think it should have been. If it had been presented to me that way, I think I would have been like, oh yeah, no, I need him to be able to do it, right? Yeah, right. It probably still would have taken 10 times. Like you're still going to have to say it a few times. I probably still would have had a moment of, no, that's a W word. We're not talking about that. But I think I would have heard it louder if we were talking about it being for his intellectual development. Yes. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So giving that bit more reasoning and I guess the why.
Yeah.
Right.
Behind what we're saying.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah. We're not giving up. Yeah. We're not giving up on gross motor skills.
That's right.
We want to help him be his very best self.
Yeah, it's not one. Right. We've talked about this a lot with Peter Rosenbaum, Ginny Pally. We're not saying one or the other. We're talking about the and.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have so many different ways of moving and doing things, right? So it's okay if we can do it in different ways. Yeah.
I love this, Carol. I'm nodding my head a lot to everything you say. But I wanted to talk now about, we spoke a little about early intervention and school, and now obviously your boys are 27, so moving into that post-school life. And what was that like for you and your family?
Yeah.
Well, we're there still, so it's hard a little bit. I will say that when Wade was in residency in those hard years, he would come in and we would have one date night every 6 months or something. And he and I would go out, and he would immediately start telling me about how in the middle of the night, he is sitting up in the call room bed going, how are they going to go to college and what's going to happen? And I'm like, I'm just trying to keep him fed.
Yeah.
Like I'm the day to day is killing me, and you're somewhere in the future. I need you to come with me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the night before Benjamin started college, I was losing my mind. I'm like, how's he going to navigate campus, and what's that going to look like for him? And Wade looks at me. He's like, welcome. I have been waiting for you here for 18 years. Right? So we talk a lot about the fact that college felt to us like an end all be all. Like if we could help them successfully navigate that, right?
Yeah.
That was such a life goal, and they did it. They did it beautifully, and they graduated. And now what? So Mason is my son that uses crutches to walk. We call them power sticks at our house because he started using them at 3, and crutch is a stupid word for a 3-year-old. So
I'm going to use that now. Yeah.
Right. We call them power sticks. Right? He still uses power sticks.
Mm-hmm.
He is working on his PhD in bioarchaeology at Brown University, which is one of the best of the best in the States. He's doing great. And it's not that cerebral palsy doesn't still get in his way. He's an archaeologist. So
amazing.
He goes to other countries and he digs. And of course, I have to remind him on occasion, you do have CP, like you're going to get more tired and your body can't necessarily keep up. And so I keep, not because I want to remind him, but because he doesn't necessarily take that into consideration when he's exhausted, why he's exhausted. Well, it's because you're fighting your body also. But he's doing good things. He actually is doing research on disability in the ancient world.
Oh my God,
and how cultures have changed the way they deal with disability through time. And fascinating.
Incredible.
Completely fascinating. You'll want to have him on your podcast.
I think
he's
so.
a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Benjamin is living at home with us and doing great things, but he does advocacy work for the state of Delaware. He runs a small group of young people with disability that he calls RISE Delaware, RISE DE. And the RISE stands for, now I'm going to forget because I'm in Australia and I'm tired. He's talking about redefining independence. Because he says that it's more autonomy we need to be focusing on in our society, much like young moms look at walking as the end all be all.
Yeah.
Older moms look at their child becoming independent as the end all be all.
Yes.
And Benjamin believes that we have to redefine that independence is not the same for everybody. It doesn't look the same, and that's okay. He is dependent on caregivers, myself, his father, or his hired attendants to get him up in the morning and to help him get dressed and for toileting and preparing his meals. But he's very independent in his thinking.
Yeah.
He has his own opinions, and you only have to go to Twitter and look at both of our Twitters to know how different those opinions are. But he's very independent in that area. However, getting a job outside of college has been a little more challenging.
Sure.
It's hard to find the right place to be hired when you require an attendant to come with you. The pandemic, while it set us back in many ways because he was locked down for his health. It also opened doors because now so many of his meetings are by Zoom, which is super easy to navigate.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're sort of in a never land. It takes so much energy to train and hire attendants who can provide his care that some days he doesn't have anything else to give. Right.
Yeah.
He does like to do a lot of political work. I tend to ask him, like, what is going to light your fire? Like, what makes you just think this is what I want to do today? And he definitely has ideas, but reaching those seems to be a little harder to navigate with a power wheelchair.
Okay.
And so I do think that's we're in a weird place. We're in a place that maybe we didn't worry about enough when they were younger, because we had this other image, and now we're trying to navigate it. So we're doing work. We're doing, Benjamin and I both work in the state of Delaware to work on employment opportunities for people with disabilities. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in many states, they can pay sub-minimum wage if you have a disability, which should be outlawed everywhere. Right? We shouldn't get paid less because our body doesn't work the same.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of advocacy work on that. Yeah. It is, Benjamin says, a full-time job to have a disability. There's a great advocate in the States. She passed last year, but Judy Human, who did a lot of the accessibility law work in our country. And one of the things she says is that, and I'm not quoting her exactly, but she says the tragedy is not in my wheelchair and my physical disabilities. The tragedy is that society refuses to acclimate so that I can access everything I need, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm driven by that every day. Like we have to knock down more roadblocks for our young adults to be able to go pursue their dreams. And I think today we're just in a place that we're knocking down roadblocks for Benjamin. And so I'm not sure what tomorrow holds. He's wonderful and amazing. And you would also love, I would love for him to have been at the conference. His seat at the table would have been fabulous in that presidential address.
I feel like we need to speak
He's
to
very
him as
articulate.
well. I think we're speaking with everyone in your family, Carol. But on that, Carol,
so that's where we are.
Oh gosh, it's always tricky to be in a place where there's no real answers for just yet. You know, you've got all this, lived experience of growing up, and that we can pass that on, and everyone can benefit from that. But it's something that I know that we do need to think about more. Children do become adults, and
they do.
Even more so your point about the fact that you don't want your child spending all their time in therapy, because it's about life and finding something that you are passionate about. But it's also hoping that, us together as a big body can start really advocating for it, not just talking about therapy and the goals that we have set there. There's just so much more to life. And
there is.
There's a role for every single person to be playing in that. And look, I don't know the answers for that either. And a lot of it probably does hold a lot in policy and trying to have that kind of influence, because it feels a bit like unless there's a policy about it, it's not going to move forward, right? It does feel that way in a way. Yeah. Is there anything that you would advise for us to do as a community? Some of the things that you're seeing right now, what can we be doing?
I think you're doing beautiful in Australia, by the way. Like, we have seen such great access everywhere we've gone. And so it's exciting. I know that Wade today at the Royal Children's Hospital is there because they have set the bar and he wants to, to learn. Yeah. But I think we have to keep advocating for not differentiating. Like, the jobs should be available to whoever is best qualified, regardless of a wheelchair or not a wheelchair. We say, we don't want you to see the wheelchair when you look at Benjamin. Now, you have to see it in a way that means you don't invite him over and you have 16 steps to get in your front door. But really, who is he? He is so much more than his cerebral palsy, right? Like that is, and so if we're working as a society to see worth in our fellow human beings, that's what we want, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has worth. What we presume competence, right? Like presume my worth. And if we do that for everybody, when we were in Minnesota for training, and it would snow a lot. That snow we were talking about. And I would get to school and they would have shoveled the snow into the ramp to get into the school. And I would always be like, no, like, you can't shovel the snow into the ramp. Benjamin can't get in, right? Like all the kids can walk up a ramp. Yeah. So let's clear the ramp. Yeah. And then everybody gets in, right? It's that mentality.
That's right.
How do we spread that mentality that if we're presuming confidence in me and in you and in Benjamin, right, it's better for the greater good.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Carol, I just love your passion behind this, and I think I'm excited to see what comes from that will continue to come from that. And look, we could talk to you for hours and hours, and I still have so many questions.
Yeah, I would love that.
And we may just have to get you back. But for families that may be struggling to think about what the future might hold, what word of advice would you give them?
Knock down your own paradigms as a parent. Let your child lead the way. I signed Benjamin up for a power soccer program when he was about 12. I drove him an hour and a half to get there twice a week. I thought this was the most brilliant thing. He would learn to play a sport. Everybody wants to play a sport. And Benjamin was in the back of the field doing donuts one night. And so when we got in the car, I'm like, dude, you weren't even where the ball was. Like, what were you doing? He was like, I was casting everybody on the team in a movie. Like, this is not your thing, right? Like, you do not care about sports. Yeah. We have to let our children, we have to follow their passion. And I think it's hard. I think it's hard for any parent, right? To get out of their child's way and let them find their passion. So that it would be my advice to all parents, which is what I'm just saying, right? Yeah. It's the same for everybody. But I think we really struggle when our child has cerebral palsy, not to push them down a road that we think is going to be the road they need to go down. Yeah. You know, I think Benjamin needs to go to law school. And I tell him that probably once or twice a week, maybe once or twice a day. And he's like, I don't want to go to law school, Mama. I don't care. We work so hard to push our kids when we really have to let them drive the boat. Yeah. We have to let them show us what they're passionate about. Yeah. Because here's the thing, they're going to work harder to do what they want to do than they are to do what I think they should want to do, right? Like that's never going to be their thing. Let them drive the boat. And I would encourage parents, I adore my kids. I think that we laugh that Benjamin and Mason kind of cut through the chaff, that they are surrounded by good people because you're not going to hang out with us if you are not willing to work harder to get in the restaurant, right? Or sit at a certain table because it's the only one that's accessible. The hard, build a ramp at your house. We find that we are surrounded by some of the richest personalities because they're willing to do that for us, to do the hard with us. And so that is what I always want to say is that your children are going to lead you to some really good people. Your children are going to be really good people and let them drive that boat. Let them lead you there.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Carol, I
don't really have anything else to say after that. That's incredible. What beautiful advice for everyone, actually. This is just beautiful advice. And look, we're going to leave some space for Ed. We're going to do a Tell It to Ed segment, but normally we get you to do a summary for us, but I feel like that was the summary. And that was pretty incredible. So Ed, we're going to hand over to you. So Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health. He has been listening to a lot of episodes now, like 180 or 190 or something like that. So we can't say he's just a novice in this area anymore. He's gained a lot of knowledge. But he does ask some very different questions than we would often. Sometimes he accuses us of taking too many questions. We don't leave anything for him. But we'll see what he comes up with here. Ed, hello, welcome.
Hey.
To the mic, that is. Do you have a question for the wonderful Carol?
Well, I'll be honest, the conversation has been so great that I think my question list would be hundreds of questions long, and we definitely don't have time for that. So it's been amazing. The conversation's obviously covered things about functionality over form, the use of equipment to enable that kind of functionality, the whole cognitive engagement and motivation aspects. And
he's listening.
He has been listening, yeah.
Yeah, look, I've been taking notes.
Impressive.
And I think maybe I'm going to cast my question back to something that was mentioned briefly in the beginning about the idea of crying in therapy. I know that was touched on very briefly, and obviously the Olympics are on right now, and we have this whole athletic mindset about the whole no pain, no gain idea. And I just wonder how that kind of fits in with what you've seen on a personal level from the therapy side of things, and whether that was a consideration for you, and about what your take is on that. I know that there's lots of takes where we just need to push children through therapy, and if they don't like it, if they're crying, then look, that they're going to build resilience. They're going to learn to deal with it. There is an element of dealing with anxiety or stress that they kind of need to go through, and I wonder whether that really applies. I think I know the answer to the question, but I thought I would ask it anyway.
Yeah, Ed, I think there are different phases in our children's lives and different therapies. So early intervention, I really don't think there's a place for tears or telling us to push them through.
Sure.
But Benjamin and Mason both had multiple orthopedic surgeries in their lives. And so we did have seasons where they were doing rehab, doing physical and occupational therapy to recover from a surgery, that we shed a lot of tears and had to be pushed through it. So Benjamin still, there were days and days where he was having to get in a stander and try to bear weight, and he would just cry, and I would look for ways to distract him from the pain. You can use your iPad, you can play video games while you're in your stander or whatever, but he had to push his body through it. And so that was a season where we did have to say, you've got to work through it, and tears are okay. I will say Mason went through an osteotomy where he had cast on his legs, and it was a horrible season when he was 15. And he got his cast off, and as he's learning to rewalk, he fell and broke one of the legs that had been casted. Gosh. And part of that just was disuse, and so the bone had not. And I remember the morning we had heard the pop. We knew. We'd waited till the next morning to go get an x-ray, and he's in the shower, and I went to check on him. He's sitting down in the shower and he's sobbing. And I went in and I said, look, I'm setting a timer, and in 30 minutes, you're going to wipe your tears, and we're not going to cry about this anymore. That will not help us. Right. And he still talks about that day for better, for worse, that I put a moratorium on tears. We're not crying about this anymore. So I think that there are moments where we have to cry. There are moments that I've sat with the boys and cried beside them. I think it would be wrong to not acknowledge the injustice in being 15 years old and having horrible pain as you recover from a surgery, and having to make your body do things in therapy that none of your friends are doing. So there is a place for tears and pushing through those. I don't think we get to quit when it's hard, when it's for our betterment. So there are different stages of life where the no pain, no gain totally applies. But I don't think early intervention is that time.
Sure.
I think that when a little baby's crying, they're done, right?
Yeah,
They're done for the day. We're not going to keep pushing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think so. That was a great response.
That was amazing. And just I think it's the context that you put around it, Carol. It's so true, right?
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for everything. And I think blanket rules are always really difficult, but context is everything. Context and the impact. And it's always like what you said before, you kind of always need to weigh it up in terms of what's the benefit of this. Is this, and in the surgical case, well, you do need to get up. So we are going to edge our way through that. And because the greater good is sitting on the other side, and we know that. So,
right.
Yeah. Gosh.
Carol, thank you so much. I'm going to share this with my friends and families, everyone to listen to, because you speak absolute words of wisdom. So we're just so grateful for you making the time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, what an honor it's been to be with y'all. Thank you so much for letting me talk. And listen.
We have just enjoyed it so much, and I'm sure all of our listeners have as well. So please make sure you head to our website if you want any notes, or let's put some links and some information that you provided for us, Carol, as well, because I think it's so great to be on the same page. So researchworks.net, and there's a form there you can fill out as well as part of a record for your CPD requirements, because really it's the lived experience that is so vital, that is the glue between research and clinical practice. And if we're going to do it, we do it with the people that matter. And the people that we do this for. Let's always keep that in sight. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, to all of our listeners, we'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
Bye.